Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Drin Pintna. I'm the project manager for the Green Book Alliance. The GBA is a nonprofit organization focused on advancing sustainability and environmentally responsible practices across the book publishing industry. Thank you so much for joining us today for this discussion on extended producer responsibility, or EPR, and sustainable book design and what that means for the publishing industry. We know this is a topic that can feel complicated, so today's conversation is really about helping make some of these ideas more approachable and giving a broader understanding of how EPR intersects with publishing, sustainability, recycling systems, and product design. This webinar isn't necessarily about having all the answers or presenting a single perspective, because EPR impacts companies differently depending on a variety of factors, including where they operate, how their products are made, and where they sit in the supply chain. So our goal today is to bring together a range of perspectives and experiences to help unpack some of the complexity. We're very fortunate to be joined by a knowledgeable panel of speakers today. Richard Hodges from Circular Materials, Elizabeth Bartheld from Sylvamo, Claudia Pilcher from Scholastic, and Simon Crump from BIC. Thank you all for being here and for sharing your time and expertise with us. There will also be a Q&A at the end, so please put your questions in the chat at any point during the presentation. And if you have any follow-up questions after the webinar, please reach out to me. I'll pop my email in the chat. With that, we're going to get started. And Richard, I'm going to turn it right over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'll just share my screen to get started. Okay, just housekeeping. Make sure everyone can see that. We did a test before we started, but we're all good. We've got the main screen. Okay, great. So thanks for having me today. My name is Richard Hodges. I'm the Senior Director of Policy and Programs at Circular Materials. Circular Materials is a Canadian producer responsibility organization, or PRO. We run programs under Extended Producer Responsibility, or EPR, for packaging and printed paper, or PPP. So the first thing I'm going to say is there is a million acronyms in the world of EPR. So if any of you get lost, especially if this is your first time ever hearing about EPR, please do put your hand up, stop me. I'm sure with everyone's work life, they have company-wide acronyms or industry-wide acronyms. So if you're lost at any point, just let me know. I'm going to go through a number of slides today just to talk about EPR across Canada specifically, and give you just a high-level overview of how it's implemented in Canada, who is obligated, what is obligated, and just a bit of a background. Now, I'm hoping, this will start from about Circular Materials. I'm hoping the sound works. If not, then I will move on. But just raise your hand if you can't hear anything, and we'll go there. Video's easier than or nicer than me speaking directly at you guys. Sound? No? No sound. All right. See, in 1 second. There we go. All right, we're going to start again. This is my first rodeo.
At Circular Materials, we are advancing the circular economy, one that enables packaging and paper materials to be reused again and again. As an organization focused on building enhanced recycling systems, we ensure more materials are looped into the circular economy, benefiting both people and the environment. Circular Materials is a national not-for-profit that was established by Canada's leading producers, those that supply packaging and paper to consumers, to support them in meeting their requirements under extended producer responsibility regulations. Our objective is to improve the recovery of materials by implementing a harmonized approach to recycling across Canada. We are committed to building effective recycling systems that ensure materials are collected, sorted, processed, and recycled. In addition, we are returning material back to producers to be used as recycled content in new packaging and products, ensuring full circularity. We are proud to be advancing Canada's recycling systems and the way materials are managed so that they can be continuously transformed into new resources. Learn more at circularmaterials.ca.
Okay. Our great marketing team does a better job at explaining us in a minute and a half than I can. So across Canada, EPR is in most of the provinces and territories. I know there's sort of kind of a worldwide audience today. So provinces and territories in Canada are very similar to US states or even to member states in the EU, because we have a federal government in Canada. So Circular Materials operate 5 programs. So out in the East and the Atlantics, we have the Nova Scotia program and the New Brunswick program. We operate the Ontario program, and then Alberta and the Yukon Territory out west. These programs have launched. It's kind of been a bit of a blitz over the last 3 years. The entirety of Canada, apart from British Columbia, has essentially transitioned from either a municipal-led residential recycling system or a shared system to 100% controlled and operated by the producers under EPR. So it's been a wild 3 years as such, and we're finally fully transitioned almost. We've got some extra time in Alberta to go, but it's been a busy one. We operate those 5 programs as I mentioned, and then there are other EPR programs for PPP, packaging printed paper in Canada. That includes British Columbia, which is the first to have full EPR in Canada since 2014. In Saskatchewan, in the prairies, SK Recycles, and then in Manitoba, Multi-Materials Stewardship Manitoba. Both those ladders are transitioning to full EPR, where 100% of the costs and operations are managed by the PRO rather than a joint effort with municipalities. And then Quebec has full EPR as of this year, and they are managed by Eco Entreprise Quebec, who again are another not-for-profit PRO. There are a couple of other provinces and territories that haven't yet got to EPR. So PEI, Prince Edward Island, out in the Atlantics, and Newfoundland and Labrador. And then the territories of Nunavut and Northwest Territories have yet to release regulation. All of the ones that have yet to release regulation have indicated at some point in the future they will move forward with EPR regulation. So it's definitely gaining momentum across the country. The one other thing to sort of mention, I'll come on to this in future slides, is because we are a federal system, much like the States or like the European Union, our environmental law is devolved down to our provinces and territories. So in effect, there can't be a federal EPR system for everyone that's exactly the same for everyone. So what our job is to try and do at Circular Materials is guide regulators, governments to create a harmonized system across the whole of Canada to make it easy for producers to report and easy for consumers at home to understand what they have to do. So if you move from Toronto to Calgary, it's not that different. You don't have to figure out a whole new set of rules and to understand what you have to recycle. Okay, so just to level set the basics of extended producer responsibility and the role of PRO. Again, another snazzy video that will do a better job in a minute and a half, and then we can talk about some of the finer details.
Extended Producer Responsibility, or EPR, is a policy approach in which producers, the businesses that supply packaging and paper to residents, are responsible for the end-of-life management of their materials. That means contributing financially to, and in some cases, operating the recycling system. EPR starts with environmental legislation, obligating producers to take responsibility for their materials straight through to end of life. Recovery and recycling targets are set, and reporting requirements are defined. This helps shift material from the waste stream into the recycling system. To fulfill these legal obligations, many producers join a Producer Responsibility Organization, or PRO, who administer an EPR program on their behalf. Producers pay fees to a PRO, and the PRO uses the fee revenue to support the collection, sorting, and recycling of material. In some EPR models, a single jurisdiction is managed as a whole, with a consistent material list and an integrated material management supply chain. This creates greater scale and efficiency. Residents are informed what is accepted and how to recycle it through promotion and education. Material is then collected from residents' homes or depots in partnership with local governments or private waste management companies. Material is then brought to a material recovery facility to be weighed, sorted, and baled by specific material type, such as the kind of paper or plastic resin. Because of the potential scale of the system, EPR can facilitate investment in infrastructure and advanced sorting technologies, resulting in better quality materials and more of the material ultimately being recycled. The goal is to create a circular economy for material by selling it to verified end markets to be made into new products. Throughout this process, the amount and type of material is tracked, weighed, and recorded, so performance requirements are fulfilled and results can be verified and improved. In the end, the Pro ensures that producers meet their regulatory obligations and verify their performance targets. The material enters back into the market, contributing to a circular economy.
All right. I'll skip past that slide just because the next couple of slides there are the sort of backup for folks if the video doesn't work, and also for posterity for you guys afterwards. But just so they go over the what is EPR and what is a pro. Okay, so now we're just gonna take a quick stop tour across Canada to show you some of the differences that we have. So this is really useful information if you are obligated in Canada or you think you might be obligated in Canada, to understand how the different models work, what is obligated, and who might be obligated in the supply chain. So we have broadly two types of systems in Canada, two types of regulatory systems. We have one, which is the stewardship plan, and the other, which is called individual producer responsibility, or another acronym, IPR. Essentially, the stewardship plan, all the producers get together with their pro and they submit a whole big plan, usually 3 to 5 years, of how we're going to operate the system. Everything from collections to sorting, promotion, education, and so on. And it's overseen by the provincial territorial government. The second one, individual producer responsibility, most of the requirements for collection and post-collection, etc., are hard-coded into the regulation, and then certain targets are set, and you have to go away and meet them. And there's usually a third-party approval done by a separate third-party organization for that. So it's kind of a mixed bag across Canada. They each have their, no pun intended, but each have their pros and cons. They can be somewhat challenging for producers to navigate. Ultimately, our job here is, if you are obligated in Canada, is to speak to us. We'll walk you through what you need to submit, and then we'll do all the stuff in the background, essentially, to make sure you're compliant. Across Canada, although we operate 5 programs, there are, as I mentioned, quite a lot of other pros. They are regulated at the provincial or territorial level, so every different province and territory has its own regulator. And there was a transition that took place mostly in the last 3 years, apart from in BC. These are the programs that we operate in Canada. And then coming on to who is obligated, again, although we wish that the definitions were exactly the same, they are slightly different. But in the whole, if you are the brand holder in Canada, then you are the obligated party. If there is no brand holder in Canada, then it's typically the first importer into the country. And then if there's no importer, it's the retailer. So if you're producing goods and you have your brand on the side of the packaging, it's pretty obvious you're the brand holder. Let's say you're just importing goods from a different brand holder. You're the first person bringing it into the country, you would be the obligated party. And then the third option, essentially, if you're just bringing those goods in and selling them straight to end user, then you would be the obligated party. A couple of other nuances. A lot of the jurisdictions have what they call a marketplace seller. That is for the large e-commerce online sites to essentially ensure they are compliant. And then a couple of the ones, BC and Quebec, have a licensee trademark nuance as well. Again, I'll leave my the details at the end of the session, but any sort of nuanced questions we're happy to take afterwards. Canada also has, and most jurisdictions for EPR have a de minimis threshold. So basically, to keep small companies out of the system, because to reduce administrative burden for small businesses. And I won't go through all of them, but as you can see, there's a revenue component and there's a supply component. Typically, your revenue is around $1 million or more. You have to essentially register with the EPR program, and then also supply. Usually over 1 ton, you have to register, and can be fairly easy to get to over a ton of packaging and paper products. Coming on to what is obligated then. So in Canada, broadly, these 4 categories are obligated. So you have packaging and packaging-like products. That is the stuff that we use day in, day out for our grocery shop. It's the stuff you buy from the supermarket, etc., that you would recognize as packaging. We have single-use items, stuff like coffee cups, straws, beverages, like these kind of things. Compostable products and packaging. They are included in pretty much all jurisdictions. And then I suppose the one most relevant to the audience today, and the paper side. So all programs in Canada exclude bound reference books, literary books, and textbooks. So softcover and hardcover books are not included in Canadian EPR, but the packaging around them would be flyers, brochures, booklets, any other kind of paper fiber, or use for copying or writing or any other general use would be included. And if it makes it to the end user. So in Canadian EPR, what is often called secondary or tertiary kind of packaging that is used in your distribution networks, business to business, that the consumer never sees, that's not included. But the stuff that comes around the product or that goes to the consumer is included. And again, happy to answer any questions on that. If you've got any specific examples you want questioning. And then where do we collect from, or who are we required to collect from, is also different across the jurisdictions, but broadly it's single unit and multi-unit residential. And then a few other places like long-term care homes, schools, and a couple of places we have small businesses. I do want to say that like the collections and the way the EPR works in Canada doesn't include commercial. So IC&I, another acronym, institutional commercial waste, so business waste essentially. The programs are only required to pick up materials from residents essentially. And then when do you need to report? So every year, if you're an obligated producer, you need to report your supply data. So how much packaging, paper, single-use products, compostables, etc., in a long list of categories. How much did you place onto the market in the previous year? So for 2025-6, this is the 2025 information, but it's usually May 31st. Sometimes it can be 15 days before, but around May, you would report what you put onto the market in the previous year, and that would set your share of the costs and your fees for the following year. So yeah, it's a large exercise to do. And again, if you're just starting out, it's going to seem quite daunting. But that's basically why we exist, to walk folks through it. So if you think you're obligated, I would always just say like reach out, and we can walk you through to work out if you are, and if you are, then walk you through like your first hold your hand through the first like reporting cycle. I'm just going to wrap up in sort of saying that our role here as in Canada and CM is to advance the circular economy. You've seen in the video, essentially, we need to collect the material, sort the material, recycle it into new products and packaging, and get that stuff back to producers so they can use that material and build that circular economy. We've been developing and enhancing the recycling systems in Canada for a number of years now, and the improvements are ever ongoing. And we really want to get that material back into producers' hands for the next steps. I'm gonna pause now. I think I'm hopefully roughly on time. I think we're going to do questions at the end. Is that right? Okay.
Yeah, that's correct. Thank you so
Hey,
much, Richard. And just for those in the audience who were wondering, so Circular Materials is a Canadian organization, but I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth, and then Claudia will be after that. And they are both focusing more on the US market. Okay, thanks so much, Elizabeth. Take it away.
Great. So I think you can see my screen. So welcome, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Bartheld from Sylvamo, one of the world's largest producers of uncoated free sheet paper, including the printing and writing grades that book publishing industry depend on. I am the Vice President of Global Government Relations. And I want to give you a paper manufacturer's perspective on EPR, what it is, where it is going, and how Sylvamo is navigating it while discussing where we think the policy could be improved. I have about 10 minutes, so we're going to jump right in. And I'm going to focus more on the US. So I'm glad Richard kind of got the explanation out about all of the acronyms. So just a quick grounding on who we are. Sylvamo operates 7 mills across 3 continents, producing 3.3 million short tons of paper annually, 3.4 billion in sales, more than 6,500 employees. Our papers end up in books, copy paper, printing papers, envelopes, folders, educational materials. So when EPR laws sweep paper alongside packaging, companies like us are directly affected. So we have a very real stake in how these programs are designed and administered. Here's what I want you to take away before we go any further. Paper already has a functioning, this is in the US, paper already has a functioning market-driven recycling system. In the US, paper recycling rates are up to 60 to 64%, higher than any other material in the municipal waste stream. Paper fibers can be recycled up to 7 times. And paper is made from trees, a generally renewable resource managed on a sustainable cycle. Over 1 billion trees are planted every year in the US. This is not a material in crisis. EPR was designed for hard to recycle items and recycling streams that aren't developed. Paper's system isn't broken, and that's one of the foundations of our policy position. So I think Richard kind of covered this. What is EPR? At its core, it shifts end-of-life costs from municipal governments to producers. Similar to Canada, companies pay an annual fee into a producer responsibility organization, which funds the recycling infrastructure. EPR started in Europe and Canada and is now arriving in the US. The first programs were launched in 2025. A key nuance for this audience: some EPR laws include paper, some exempt virgin or fresh fiber mills. For publishers, this can translate into reoccurring fees tied in the packaging you use, cartons or mailers or protective wraps, rather than bound books. In many jurisdictions, those are exempt. The scope varies enormously by state, which creates real compliance complexities across the supply chain. So this map shows where EPR stands legislatively across the US as of today. Some states are already implementing, some states are doing needs assessments, others have active legislation pending, and a few bills have failed for now. So the bottom line, this is spreading quickly, and kind of companies that aren't tracking this will now be caught flat-footed. Here's the actual program timeline. Oregon was first, with paper and packaging fees started in July 2025. Colorado followed in July of 2026. California begins in 2027, but covers packaging only, not paper. Maine and Maryland launch in 2027 and 2028, respectively. And Maryland and Minnesota have important carve-outs, so mills that use virgin fiber are exempt. Washington exempts copy paper. These exemptions are a direct result of industry advocacy, but they can also mean you can't apply one state's rules to another. There's no national uniform standard, and every state law requires its own analysis. So who pays? The slide is important for publishers and the entire supply chain and the audience. The question of who pays is not simple. Depending on how state laws are written, the obligation can fall on the paper manufacturer, the converter, the brand owner, the retailer, the distributor, publisher, the printer. Any company that puts paper in consumers' hands could be the obligated producer. This is a live question. For book publishers, you need to know whether your state defines you as an obligated party. Our core policy is that EPR doesn't make sense for printing and writing paper. Paper already has a successful system, and layering fees onto it won't necessarily improve recycling outcomes. It will just add costs with not additional environmental value. Let's go to the next slide. So to provide an idea of how complex this can be, this slide shows where Sylvamo's products fall under EPR obligations across Oregon, Colorado, California, and Washington. So paper and ream wrap are broadly in scope with state-specific nuances. Notably, Colorado exempts legally required documents, and California classifies ream wrap with 1 drop of poly as a plastic rather than a paper. The corrugated box category has the most complexity. Oregon and Washington offer business-to-business exemptions, but California classifies as plastic. You heard me right. Corrugated box can be plastic due to adhesives, with a recycling off-ramp potentially coming later. Box strap and pallet wrap are in scope in 3 of 4 of the states with no exemptions. Pallets are the clean win. Fortunately, they're reusable exemptions in California and Washington that they qualify for even when they're not explicitly exempt. Bottom line, exposure variety varies from product by product and state by state. So how's Sylvamo actually responding, given the operational complexity? 4 concrete steps. First, we're thoroughly reviewing every law, implementing regulation and program plan for how these are finalized. We had to set up an internal team covering several groups from sustainability, government relations, finance, commercial. Second, we have registered with the Circular Action Alliance. That's the main pro here in the United States, and signed the required producer agreements. Third, we submit data and pay fees where legally required. Fourth, we communicate proactively with customers and supply chain partners so they understand their potential obligations. One of the core values at Sylvamo is we always do the right things in the right ways for the right reasons. So compliance is a non-negotiable for us, even if we continue to advocate for an improved policy. For anyone who wants to go in deeper, we maintain a dedicated EPR resource hub at the address listed below. If you you will find our policy positions, state-by-state summaries, and updates, how the legislation has evolved. And I'm happy to take questions at the end. I know that was a pretty quick overview of EPR in the US from a paper manufacturing perspective. I think I turn it over to Claudia.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. That was really great. And Claudia, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, everyone. Brief introduction, I'm Claudia Pilcher. I'm the Sustainability Manager at Scholastic, where I've been for a little over 3.5 years now, helping to support us in our sustainability journey. And apologies in advance, I did mention to Durin, but we are having fire drills today. So if at any point anyone hears some blaring noises, that is what that is. But fingers crossed that we will be able to push that off. So, for my portion of the presentation, what I wanted to do is build on all of the great information and details that Richard and Elizabeth have provided on EPR and really focus specifically on what it looks like from a publisher's perspective and more granularly, really from an operational and supply chain standpoint. So rather than kind of recovering the details of the policy and EPR itself, I'll focus on how this actually shows up in day-to-day decision-making for publishers. So with that, I will go ahead and share my screen. And Durin, if you can just give me a thumbs up when you all can see that. Great. So, at this point, we've all kind of heard the broader context. Really, what I want to emphasize here is kind of how quickly this shifts from something conceptual to something highly operational. For publishers and manufacturers specifically, EPR matters because it changes what we're accountable for as producers and retailers. Historically, when making packaging decisions, the main priorities were cost, protection, and design. Whereas now those decisions have to be tied to other factors, which are reporting, fee exposure, and internal accountability. So, what's important to stress here is that this isn't a single policy change. It's part of a broader shift towards circularity as an industry, and as a globe. And, from our perspective and looking at this, one of the biggest risks is really treating this as a one-time compliance exercise. Because as Elizabeth mentioned, what we're starting to see is that reactive approaches are quickly becoming inefficient. You end up having to recreate the same data formats for various states or provinces, chasing down suppliers for bill of materials, and fixing decisions much later on in the process. So one of the big takeaways for publishers is really this is about building the capacity to respond to this continuously. And this becomes very real for us when a decision that used to feel small suddenly has consequences. For example, we might choose a certain type of shrink wrap simply because it performs well on our packing line and protects against damage. And that's something that previously we would have done without a second thought. Whereas now that same decision kind of requires us to ask larger questions around what exactly is the material composition of this? How is it categorized? And what does that mean from a reporting and cost standpoint? So, what used to be kind of a tactical design choice now becomes a tracked and reportable decision. And that's really why this matters today. Lagging a little bit. So again, as a US publisher, I'll speak to our perspective and really just talk about some of the things that we can learn from our peers here. I won't repeat what's happening in Canada and Europe. I think Richard touched on that very beautifully, but I will say, what's relevant for us is reviewing the sorts of structures and processes that these places that have had these policies in place for a long time have put in and sort of the internal workflows that they've created to respond to this kind of stuff. So the consistent themes that we've seen across EPR globally is the need for material level visibility, for data processes, and really cross-functional ownership. Because, this no longer sits in one team. It touches across the supply chain, beginning in the product development stages, in procurement, supply chain, and then, of course, sustainability. Companies that are navigating this are building systems that allow them to adapt. And, I think one of the things that people get stuck on right now is creating the perfect answer right away. This is developing day in and day out, right? And things are changing. And so really it's more at this point about being flexible and being able to adapt to these things and creating these baseline data, gathering processes and figuring out what the priorities are so that as we continue to scale EPR across the globe, we're equipped for those reporting and compliance requirements. One example of this we'll talk about is situations where you have to go back to a supplier and ask for material details and the answer isn't readily available. It might take multiple follow-ups or clarification across teams or going back to sub-suppliers. So, what might look like a simple data request to get this information for reporting really becomes a multi-step process. And that's where we really have to see this sort of collaboration across all of the various groups to make this work efficiently and effectively. I'll also touch a little bit here on some of the other implications. Within publishing specifically, EPR has a very specific scope around bound books, and I know Elizabeth did a good job of covering a lot of the paper. But for distributors and those who deal more in novelty and packaging and such as Scholastic does, there's a lot of other implications. It really hits everything at once. So in distribution, everything that is used to move products becomes a part of the equation, the boxes, the mailers, wrap. And as a distributor, you feel the immediate impact of that because most materials, excuse me, are high volume and operationally embedded. The other area that we see it is in novelty and non-book product. So this is, one of perhaps the most complex areas, not just in the US, but globally, because these products are often multi-material, sourced from all over the world, and up until this point, really not designed with end of life in mind. So, understanding the material composition of all of these products when they have various categories that you have to report on, one product could have 20 different materials that you would have to classify. And then assessing that impact, again, goes back to that idea that we need better data than ever, earlier involvement in design decisions, and stronger coordination across our teams. So kind of the last slide that I'll touch on here is, in highlighting some of those things, we stress some of the areas that companies should focus on. And I don't want this to be a scare tactic or anything that intimidates people, because I think one of the things that we should really consider is using EPR as an opportunity. And I know Simon will get into this a little bit in his presentation, but shifting the conversation and reframing it around the idea of moving from added pressure to highlighting opportunities that may have been overlooked before really allows us to gain some clarity around what materials we use and why we use them. So one of the biggest, mindset changes for us has been realizing how many opportunities are hidden in small changes. For example, removing a component of packaging that doesn't add real value or has just been around for legacy reasons. Simplifying packaging layers, consolidating material types. Individually, these decisions are small, but across a large portfolio, they add up quickly in both cost and complexity reduction. Another example is supplier conversations, and the fire drill is going off, so I'll wrap up quickly in the next 30 seconds. But really, talking more with suppliers about what exactly these products are made of, alternative construction opportunities, and simplification. So, I'll close with this very briefly. From a publisher perspective, EPR isn't asking us to just comply with new rules. It's asking us to operate differently and make decisions earlier and work more closely with our partners. So, and with that, I will make my departure.
Thank you so much, Claudia. You are such a star for wrapping up through fire drills. Simon, I will turn it right over to you.
Thank you. Claudia seems to still be presenting.
Sorry, I'm leaving now, but I'll stop sharing my screen.
Okay, thank you. Okay, everybody. Good afternoon. My name's Simon Crump. I've been in publishing for over 30 years, and I've been working as a consultant for the last 5 years, either for myself, for various other consultancy organizations, and also some trade organizations, one of those being BIC, which is Book Industry Communication Limited in the UK, and that is all about improving everything up and down the book industry supply chain. So this afternoon, I'm going to be talking to you about a specific BIC project. I can just get that. Can you see my slides? Great. So, project I'm going to be talking about is BIC's Designed for Recycling project. This has been a three-part project that's been running for a number of years now. The first part was to do a life cycle assessment. And this is where we looked at all the recycling that's been going on in the book industry a few years ago now. And I would say the main points that come out of that report, as you can see there, a lot of work is being done across the book industry supply chain. We're just not very good at telling people about what we're doing and the really good things that are happening. I saw, I think it was Elizabeth said that you've got 60 to 64% of recycling going on with paper. That's up at about 84% in Europe. Um, Another thing we discovered with this that it's difficult to measure the CO2e of a book, as the starting points and end points are variable depending on how people are measuring it. But then there comes a question around should we be measuring the CO2 of a book versus what are no organization's overall carbon footprint? So people have different views on that, and there are different ways of doing it. Then there are obviously things that can't be so easily recycled, like the plastics and the plastic wrap that are being used within the industry at the moment. But then there's a lot of work going on, we discovered, about with people trying to find new products, trying to find things that actually can be changed and improved upon. And let's be honest themselves, books themselves are 100% recyclable. Yes, there are impurities, but the glue and some of the plastic in the binding is really down at 1 or just over 1% of the whole thing. And those impurities can be removed when a whole book is being recycled. So they are very recyclable. And depending on whether books are, say, sitting in a warehouse and then they end up being pulped because they haven't sold, because we know the issues are sometimes overprinting, because it's always been difficult to get good forecasting in the past, or whether they've been part of returns, at least there's a closed system and books are likely to be recycled from that. The problem comes when more education is required, that we need to inform people about curbside recycling at home and that you can actually just put a book in your recycling and it will be recycled properly and go back into a circular economy. So that was the first project, which was part of the project, was to look at a life cycle assessment to see what the industry is currently doing. We then moved on to part two, where we looked at the initial design to a manufactured book. We decided that it was easier to look at that. So in that case, we're taking the initial designs of a book and taking it to now ending with a book sitting at the end of the binding line. So what are the main points that came out of this report? There's a lot that can be done from the initial design to make sure the book can be more recyclable. You can look at the materials that you're using. You can look at the text and cover designs. You know, there was one author of a children's book. He didn't want any plastics being used. He didn't want a laminate. So they designed the cover specifically with darker colors and things so it wouldn't appear as though it was scuffed and marked. You can look at the text and how you're designing that. You can use sustainable typography. We all know that people might use a smaller font because the books come in bigger than expected, but you don't want to make the length longer, or you might use a larger font because the books come in smaller and you need it to look like a book, and that's one way of doing it. But actually, there are sustainable type fonts now being developed that, and I have an example in a slide's time or two that shows you what is being done in that area. The materials used in the manufacture of book, the paper themselves. You know, do you use a recycled paper? What is the carbon footprint of these papers? You can go in and you can investigate. You can ask your printers what papers are they using? What are the properties of those paper? What is the carbon footprint of it? So if you're wanting to reduce your own carbon footprint, you might change paper grades to something different. Laminations. Yes, we know why a lamination is put on a book because it protects it. And if you're keeping a book for 30 years or more, it does a really good job at that. But the lamination makers are actually working to make laminations thinner, but still have the same properties to protect a book. In making it thinner, they're reducing the percentage of the book that is plastic. But if a book isn't being recycled immediately or for whatever reason, then is it such a bad thing to use? Because it's doing what's been asked of it, which is to protect your life for longevity. You know, printers are looking at the inks that they're using, and are they moving to vegetable oil ink, vegetable-based inks, just to see what you can do differently to make it easier to recycle books, to be more user-friendly, well, eco-friendly. And then foils, if you put foils on a book, if you tweak the design, again, you can use less foil and you're not wasting so much. And I've got an example of that coming up. And there are a lot of examples in the part 2 of the project, in the report. It is all about giving people practical ideas and thoughts of what they can do, what they can think about. When I used to be a production controller many years ago, you used to try to make books actually fit and even working. And that even involved, okay, if it's gone 2 pages over, what can I do to be reduced down the extent? That doesn't seem to happen so much, but that was something that you used to work and do all the time. There are all examples and things like this in but the part 2 report. But I would say there's a constant process of continuing improvement in the book industry supply chain, of trying to make things more sustainable, trying to make the materials that you're using more eco-friendly. So just a few examples that I pulled out of the report. This one's looking at sustainable typesetting. And you've got a comparison in the figure on the left where you've got a piece of text that's been set in Garamond, and you can see it's quite small. But next to it is the same piece of text set in a specifically designed sustainable serif font. In that case, what they have done, they haven't increased the width of the letters, but they have increased the height of the X height of them to make it more readable. You know, when we go into bookshops, sometimes you pick up a book and think, I want to read this, and you open it and think, gosh, the text is small. And that's an issue for everybody. But something with this sustainable font, whereas on the left it's using Garamond 12 point, and you can see the example with the sustainable serif font, it's also 12 point with a larger X height. But to have that as Garamond, it needs to be over 15 points to get it to being the same X height. So you can see you're making savings there, and you can reduce down the number of pages that you're actually using and printing in a book. Another one that we just pulled out on paper attributes, depending on how efficient a mill is, depends on what energy source it is using, can directly impact the carbon footprint of that paper. So all these papers here, the first 2 are virgin papers and the third one's are recycled. They're all of the same base weight and similar brightness and opacity, but the recycled paper, due to the fact that the energy source is fossil fuels and a large investment required to move away from them, its carbon footprint is 10 times that of paper A as a virgin paper. So depending on how papers are being reviewed has a direct impact, as well as what the source material, on what the carbon footprint can be of a paper. You need to be talking to your printers, what are they using, and ask these questions if you want to change things to reduce your carbon footprint in your books, in your overall company's carbon footprint. Right? The final example is these are 2 images of front covers, well, the whole of a book, the front cover, the spine, and we use it doing some blocking. So you can see the one on the left, you've got a little logo in the top right-hand corner of the front cover and the bottom left, but that is actually very wasteful. It's wasting, I'm sorry, it's in metric units, but it's wasting 113 square centimeters of foil every time that you do the blocking of that. By moving where you had those little logos, as you can see on the front cover, that utilizes a smaller amount of foil, and you're just wasting 17 square centimeters of foil, so only 17%. So by making some basic changes, you can really reduce down the wastage that you're doing when you're printing books, depending on what you're doing. And as I've said, there are a lot of examples and ideas throughout the book. I've just picked out a few for you. And then part 3 of the project is looking at the manufactured book to its end of life. And this has looked at all the packaging that's been used in the supply chain, from the cartons, the plastic shrink wrap, the void foil materials that are used if they need to package out the cartons, pallet wrap, and how packaging materials are managed at their end of their life. We've also mapped the routes of supply and return journeys for books and packaging. This is current, if I say parts 1 and 2 are currently available on the Bit Green Hub for everybody. You can go there and you can download them and you can use them and read them. They are perfectly applicable for anybody, no matter what your location is in the world. Part 3, we're still waiting for sign off on the publication of it, but it should be out in May and June of this year. BIC generally makes things available to its members for the first 6 months of publication, and then it makes free for everybody after that. But if you'd like any more, there are my contact details, and there's something about BIC at the end. But thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Simon. That was really insightful. We have just a couple minutes for questions. If anybody from the audience has anything, please pop those into the chat. Oh, Claudia, you're back. That's great. We have Hannah was asking, do you have any other sustainable font names to share, Simon? If you don't have an answer right away, this is also something that we can share as
Sorry,
a
I was
follow-up.
on mood. We can it's I think it's looking I think you can say that we've always had sustainable fonts because of what the X heights are, how much they take up on a space. You know, Times New Roman is very hungry for space. Something like Bembo or Garamond, you can get a lot more words on the page. This new sustainable font has just been designed to be more sustainable. So when it is smaller, it makes it readable. I would say that that company is also working with Cambridge University on fonts for people who have dyslexia, and making it easier for them to read books and so forth. But my contact details are in my slides. Anybody can reach out to me if they have any questions afterwards.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Okay, so for everyone here, I think we've seen a little bit of the, shall we say, tension, I guess, between sustainability ambitions and operational realities. So how do we balance those things as an industry, or how do we sort of tackle those? Because a lot of the time in supply chain, we have people coming from very different places, and we're trying to come together to form one uniform solution or a series of solutions. Do we have any thoughts on this?
I'm happy to give an answer.
Great.
I would say every publisher, or wherever you are in the book industry supply chain, you need to think about what your USP is and not throw everything away. If you're producing high-end coffee table books, for you it might be about changing your papers that have a lower carbon print footprint to them. Are you printing your books the most economical trim size for the printers you're using? So you don't get rid of your USP, but you make the changes where you can. Try and do something is better than not doing anything at all. But you shouldn't throw everything out of why you're the organization you are, because that's who you are and why you were there anyway in the first place.
Thank you. Claudia, Elizabeth, Richard, any final thoughts on this? It's okay if you do not.
I don't know if anything was said during assignments that I don't want to repeat because I had to run out. So, I think I'm all set, but, I think it's really great. Raising awareness around all of this kind of stuff is the first step. It's coming quickly, and I think the more that we're willing to collaborate and understand potential opportunities to work together moving forward, the better for everyone.
Yeah, I would
Absolutely.
echo what Claudia said. It's a complex. It takes a lot of people internally to try to figure out how to work through these systems. So work together, work with your suppliers, work down your supply chain. Feel free to ask questions because it is quite complex.
Absolutely.
Just to add on the EPR side as well, EPR at its core is just assigning the cost of those product decisions to the producer who makes those decisions. So to Simon's point, if your USP is to have really special kind of packaging, that can be fine. That can be your brand choice to make, and there is no, pros don't get involved necessarily in saying like what's good or bad. It just says here's the cost of managing that at the end of life, and therefore that needs to be brought into the conversation. Often it means that people continue with a more complex packaging, but often, to Claudia's points, you do see the changes when that conversation gets brought in.
Okay, with that, we are at time. This webinar has been recorded and will be sent out to attendees. So if you have any questions, please send them to GBA. And if you'd like to get in touch with any of these presenters directly, we're also happy to facilitate that. Thank you so much to our presenters and everyone who attended. A few reminders from the GBA. Our book Carbon Calculator is set to launch soon, and we are looking for beta testers. So please contact if you are interested in that. And also, don't forget to follow the GBA on LinkedIn and subscribe to our newsletter. Thank you so much, everybody, and take care.